In this Outriders build guide, I'm going to be showing you my Shredomancer build, which is a beginner Technomancer build meant for mid-range combat. In this guide, I'll be showing you what skills to use, what class points to take, and what weapons and armor to look out for. If you've been looking for a way to improve your Technomancer, or you just want some insight on how to play this class, watch on to find out. The way the Shredomancer build works is that it uses Blighted Rounds to buff your damage with each shot fired, as well as spread around the toxic and vulnerability statuses among enemies. Vulnerability increases the damage enemies receive, making it much easier to kill them and more challenging enemies like captains. Because you generally need to hit enemies at least once to set vulnerability, this build works better with a weapon type that hits the target repeatedly rather than a single shot, like an assault rifle or light machine gun. Shots in succession will all benefit from the vulnerability after the first round has landed, drastically increasing your DPS. The key to this build is maintaining Blighted Rounds for the duration of each encounter, and this is done by using the armor mods Trick Up the Sleeve and Spare Mag. This will nearly guarantee you that you keep Blighted Rounds up, but if you need even further help, you can use the weapon mod Perpetuum Mobile, which refreshes your magazine when you kill an enemy while under 35% ammo. Unlike the Trickster build I made with the Shredomancer, you'll want to cover a bit more since you are way more squishy, and you can also take on captains as soon as you see them. This build absolutely melts enemies, even captains, so you want to move to cover and fire into enemies, then repeat. It's not as dynamic as the Twisted Hunter build, but it deals even more damage. The skills you'll need for this build are obviously Blighted Rounds, but you'll need Fixing Wave, and the third slot is really up to you, as there are a few good options here. In this section, I'll run you through the ins and outs of Blighted Rounds and Fixing Wave, as well as make some recommendations of what other skills you might use. Must-have skills: Blighted Rounds. This skill is the backbone of this build, and besides placing Toxic on enemies, it will deal extra damage per shot and will apply vulnerability on enemies once you have the Exposing Toxin passive. All these things combined make Blighted Rounds one of the best skills in Outriders, and maintaining it 100% of the time is key to success. Much like Twisted Rounds, Anomaly Power increases the effectiveness of your damage per shot, however, Status Power increases the damage from Toxic. Fixing Wave. This skill not only heals you, it heals all other players in your group as well as your turrets regardless of how far away from you they are. This is fantastic for group play, but it's also good for solo play because you are very squishy with the way this build is set up. Sometimes you need a panic heal, and Fixing Wave can absolutely save your life. Use it and love it. Optional skills: Cryo Turret. This skill is an excellent way to freeze enemies that are attacking you, reducing the potential damage you would take, but also making it easier to hit enemies since they cannot move while frozen. This is a very good early game skill, and it's definitely a nice addition to your skill setup, but you might consider replacing it with Blighted Turret later on. Tool of Destruction. This skill allows you to pull out a minigun or a rocket launcher with a finite number of rounds, and it can be very, very good early on. Later on, your Blighted Rounds will outperform this skill, so swap it once your Blighted Rounds are carrying you. Blighted Turret. This skill places a turret that attacks similarly to you, damaging enemies and inflicting them with Toxic. It also doesn't disappear unless you swap weapons or reload, which should be almost never, so the only way it can die is via damage. I like to use a mod to make this freeze enemies, but you don't have to do that. Another large part of this build is figuring out just exactly where to spend your class points to get the most bang for your buck. In this section, I'll show you where I like to place mine in order to be effective, but you can vary from this a bit and still be fine. This build focuses almost exclusively on Pestilence, so let's begin there. The reason to focus on Pestilence passives is because they will increase your damage the most, and you want to kill things quickly. BR8 Impact Amplifier gives you a straight damage increase, and you'll want to take this passive as many times as you can. Exposing Toxin places vulnerability on enemies affected by Toxic, which should be all, so you need to get this one ASAP. Marked for Execution is also a nice boost to this as well, so be sure to get it too. Assault Master increases your damage with assault weapons, which includes both assault rifles and light machine guns, so you'll definitely want this one, as well as Assault Adept, which does something similar. The reason we chose Assault Rifle for the first weapon with this build is because it has a high rate of fire, it's relatively accurate over longer range, and has a good amount of ammunition in its magazine. As I mentioned earlier, vulnerability is not useful in the first shot a lot of the time, so using a sniper weapon is less effective in many cases because you want to kill in one shot with these weapons. I like to convert my assault rifle to a tactical variant because it has increased stability, it has the highest per shot damage of all variants of assault rifle, and it still has a decent magazine size at 30 rounds. You can use any of the variants you want, but I found this one to be the best. As far as mods go, you can pretty much use what you like, but Perpetuum Mobile makes maintaining Blighted Rounds very easy, so if you're having trouble with this aspect of the build, then slot this one. If not, some other good mods are Critical Point for increased critical chance, and Fusion Blast, which makes one round explode for AoE damage every 1.5 seconds. These can both boost your damage even further. For your second weapon, consider using a light machine gun because they have larger magazines than assault rifle, even though they typically deal less damage per shot fired. They work better usually against bosses since you almost never have to reload to kill them, unlike assault rifles. However, they are much more or less accurate over longer ranges than assault rifles, so they are not as good at clearing enemies who are dug in cover like snipers. For this reason, your playstyle will change a bit when using them, as you will run around more and cover less. Keep this in mind and use the appropriate weapon for the situation. I convert my light machine gun to the stabilizing version to increase its accuracy by a huge amount, even though it reduces its damage per shot and magazine size. Remember that Technomancers heal per damage dealt, and if you're missing shots, then you're not healing anything. The mods you use here are the same with the assault rifle since you use it the same way, just with more ammo and less accuracy. For armor, you obviously want the highest armor value you can get to help protect you, but you do want to make sure that the mods on them are what you need since they really make this build sing. Prioritize the mods over armor values when possible, unless you can't seem to stay alive. The first mod you want to be on the lookout for is Trick Up the Sleeve, which replaces 30% of your ammo when killing a target. This one mod gives you an advantage over tricksters who use Twisted Rounds, because they must use Perpetuum Mobile as one of their weapon mods. By having Trick Up the Sleeve on your armor, you free up a spot on your weapon for something else if you wish, even though you can still use Perpetuum Mobile as well. Critical Analysis is fantastic for this build, especially when paired with Critical Point, because it increases your critical damage with Blighted Rounds active by 30%. You fire a lot of shots, and the more that crit, the faster that things die. Spare Mag is also really good for this build because a lot of times you'll make mistakes and run out of ammo with Blighted Rounds, and this essentially gives you a second chance to get it right. Blighted Rounds has a really long cooldown compared to Twisted Rounds, so it makes more sense to use Spare Mag on a Technomancer than a Trickster. There are not a ton of other good unique armor mods for this build anyhow, so it's worth taking. You can take mods for Fixing Wave if you want to further boost healing or armor, and these are not bad choices. They are, however, much more effective when playing co-op, so consider using them if you intend to play with other people. Final tips. When fighting a boss with many enemies around it, try to burst it down first and then focus on the other enemies if you can. If you look like you're going to run out of ammo before doing so, switch to an easy enemy to gain rounds back in your magazine as quickly as you can, and then finish off the boss. This build excels at killing bosses, so you should prioritize them first if you can, and make your life easier. Remember not to reload with this build since you'll wipe out your Blighted Rounds if you do, and stay away from mods or class nodes that reward reloading, as you'll be trying to do this as little as possible with this build. The idea is that you never have to reload and therefore never lose your Blighted Rounds buff. You'll still have to reload now and then, but you certainly don't want to plan for it. You can still deal decent damage without Blighted Rounds, so don't be afraid to thin out some of the enemies if you mess up and it goes on cooldown. Just don't try to take on bosses without it, or you might have a really rough time. Lastly, make sure to keep using better and better assault rifles and light machine guns as you find them. You need to keep your damage high in order to play this build, and it's far easier to mod a new weapon with Perpetuum Mobile than it is to keep upgrading your current weapons. So look out for new assault rifles and light machine guns that have high damage and not DPS, and equip and mod them every chance you get. Oh, and don't forget to change their types to tactical and stabilizing too. Stay tuned for more build guides for Outriders, and be sure to check out the Outriders wiki if you have questions about the game.